For decades, people believed the story of Al Pacino and Diane Keaton had already been written. They met while making The Godfather, fell deeply in love, walked away from each other, and quietly moved on with their separate lives. But one of Al Pacino's final public reflections on Diane revealed something far more personal than fans had ever heard before. Looking back on the woman who changed both his career and his life, Pacino shared memories that suddenly made their unfinished love story feel very different. Long before they became one of Hollywood's most unforgettable couples, Al Pacino and Diane Keaton were simply two struggling actors hoping one film might change everything. In 1971, director Francis Ford Coppola cast them as Michael Corleone and Kay Adams in The Godfather. Neither actor was yet a major star. Pacino was just 31 years old and had appeared in only a handful of films. Keaton was 25 and was better known for her Broadway work than for movies. Few people could have predicted that this casting decision would not only reshape cinema, but also begin one of Hollywood's most fascinating real-life relationships. Diane would later admit that she was captivated by Pacino almost immediately. In interviews years later, she recalled having a crush on him from the very beginning. She described him as charming, endlessly funny, incapable of stopping talking, and somehow both brilliant and vulnerable at the same time. To her, there was something about Pacino that felt like a lost orphan mixed with an extraordinary artistic mind. Pacino's memories of Diane were equally vivid, although he often expressed them through stories rather than direct declarations. One of his favorite memories came from the first gathering of the Godfather cast before filming officially began. The dinner took place in East Harlem with Francis Ford Coppola's principal cast, including Marlon Brando. Pacino later told the story during Diane Keaton's AFI Life Achievement Award tribute in 2017. According to him, Brando stood up, walked over to Diane, smiled, and introduced himself politely. "Hi, Diane, I'm Marlon Brando." Instead of reacting with awe, Diane simply looked at him, shook his hand, and answered, "Yeah, right." The room instantly understood something unusual about her. She wasn't intimidated by the most famous actor in the world. That mixture of humor, confidence, and unpredictability became one of the qualities Pacino never forgot. Their chemistry soon became obvious on screen. The Godfather, released in March 1972, became one of the greatest films ever made. Produced on a budget of approximately $7.2 million, it earned more than $250 million worldwide during its original release and went on to win 3 Academy Awards, including Best Picture. For audiences, Michael and Kay became one of cinema's defining couples. Behind the cameras, however, something even more significant had quietly begun. What started as admiration during filming gradually evolved into a relationship that would continue on and off for nearly 15 years. Unlike many celebrity romances, theirs was never built around publicity. There were no carefully staged interviews or magazine exclusives announcing their relationship. Instead, they kept much of it private, allowing the public to focus almost entirely on their work. Years later, Diane would write in her memoir, then again, that, for her, all 3 Godfather films were ultimately about one person, Al Pacino. By then, both had become Academy Award-winning actors. Yet even after decades had passed, neither seemed able to tell the story of The Godfather without eventually talking about each other. By the mid-1980s, Al Pacino found himself in a place that very few people associated with one of Hollywood's biggest stars. After dominating American cinema with films like The Godfather, Serpico, Dog Day Afternoon, and Justice for All, he had largely stepped away from the spotlight. Between 1980 and 1985, Pacino appeared in only a handful of films, choosing theater and smaller personal projects over commercial productions. While critics respected his artistic choices, his absence from mainstream movies came at a financial cost. The steady stream of major studio paychecks stopped, yet his spending habits did not. Years later, Pacino openly admitted that he was never good at managing money. In interviews promoting his memoir Sonny Boy, he recalled a period when he was spending and not earning. Rather than accepting studio offers simply because they paid well, he invested his own money into projects that interested him creatively. One of those was Chinese Coffee, a deeply personal film that gave him complete artistic freedom. Because he financed it himself, there was no pressure from producers or investors. He could work exactly as he wanted, without worrying whether the film would become a commercial success. During that period, he was living with Diane Keaton. Looking back, Pacino described those years as strangely peaceful, despite the financial uncertainty. Diane continued working steadily while he enjoyed the rare freedom to step away from Hollywood's relentless expectations. He often walked through the park, read, rehearsed, and lived at his own pace. For the first time in years, he felt as though he had escaped the pressure cooker that had defined his career since The Godfather. It was liberating, but it was also unsustainable. Eventually, reality caught up with him. The money was gone. Pacino later remembered Diane looking at him one day with her unmistakable mixture of affection and blunt honesty. She asked him what he planned to do now that he was broke. Pacino joked that he could simply return to living in a tiny apartment like he had before fame. Diane immediately shut down the fantasy. She told him he had been rich too long, and made it clear that pretending nothing had changed was no longer an option. Beneath the humor was genuine concern. She knew that if he continued avoiding major film work, he would only dig himself into a deeper financial hole. Her support became even more obvious when Pacino faced serious financial problems connected to taxes. He later admitted that he had trusted the wrong people and paid little attention to his finances, a mistake that cost him millions of dollars. Instead of criticizing him, Diane took matters into her own hands. Pacino recounted the story with laughter years later, remembering how she walked into his lawyer's office, looked directly at the attorney, and demanded, "Do you know who he is?" Before the lawyer could answer, she continued, "No, you don't. He's an idiot. You've got to take care of him." It was classic Diane Keaton, sharp, fearless, and completely unconcerned about embarrassing him if it meant protecting him. Pacino never told the story with resentment. On the contrary, he always laughed while recalling it because he understood exactly what she was trying to do. She wasn't insulting him. She was defending someone she cared about from his own inability to deal with business matters. That same practical instinct would soon lead Diane to make another decision that Pacino later acknowledged may have changed the course of his career. Rather than simply encouraging him emotionally, she decided to push him back toward the kind of role that could restore both his reputation and his financial stability. Pacino would later admit that without Diane's intervention at precisely the right moment, one of the most important comebacks of his career might never have happened. Diane Keaton was never the kind of person to stand by quietly while someone she loved drifted in the wrong direction. She believed Al Pacino's greatest obstacle was not a lack of talent, but his refusal to recognize when it was time to return to the audience that had made him one of the finest actors of his generation. Years later, Pacino revealed that she was remarkably direct. She did not flatter him or tell him everything would somehow work itself out. Instead, she challenged him in a way almost no one else dared. According to Pacino's own recollections, Diane approached him with a screenplay and said, "Come here, I've got something you're going to like." Then she delivered another brutally honest assessment. She told him he was acting as though he were still one of Hollywood's untouchable stars, but that wasn't the reality anymore. "You think you're an A guy," she said. "You're not on the A list, buddy." It was not an insult. It was a wake-up call. The screenplay was Sea of Love, a psychological crime thriller directed by Harold Becker. At the time, another actor had reportedly been interested in the project, but Diane believed the role belonged to Pacino. She urged him to stop overthinking and simply take the opportunity. Pacino later admitted that he listened because he trusted her instincts. More importantly, He knew she was speaking from a place of complete honesty rather than trying to protect his ego. Released in September 1989, Sea of Love proved Diane was right. The film paired Pacino with Ellen Barkin in the story of a veteran New York detective investigating a serial killer who targets men through personal advertisements. Produced for an estimated $19 million, the movie became a commercial success, earning more than $110 million worldwide. It was Pacino's biggest box office hit in years and reminded both audiences and Hollywood executives that he remained one of the industry's most compelling leading men. The timing could hardly have been more important. Pacino later acknowledged that he needed the work financially. Accepting Sea of Love did more than stabilize his income. It restored confidence in his career at a moment when many wondered whether his greatest performances were already behind him. Within the next few years, he appeared in a remarkable run of films, including Dick Tracy, 1990, The Godfather Part 3, 1990, Frankie and Johnny, 1991, Glengarry Glen Ross, 1992, and Scent of a Woman, 1992, the performance that finally earned him the Academy Award for Best Actor after 8 previous acting nominations. Yet what makes the story remarkable is that Pacino never framed Diane's role as merely recommending a movie. In every version of the story he told publicly, he emphasized her willingness to tell him difficult truths that others avoided. She understood that admiration alone would not help him rebuild his career. Honest advice would. That honesty appeared again during another moment Pacino never forgot. Before one of his interviews, he admitted he was nervous and uncomfortable, despite already being an internationally famous actor. Diane encouraged him as he prepared to leave the house. Then, with perfect comic timing, she called after him and said, "Al, you're going to be okay. Just remember, whatever you do, don't say you're an artist." Years later, while honoring Diane at the American Film Institute's Life Achievement Award ceremony in 2017, Pacino looked back on that memory with unmistakable affection. After recalling her advice, he smiled and finally gave the answer he had held on to for decades. "Forgive me," he said. "You're an artist. You're a great artist." By the time Diane Keaton received the American Film Institute's 45th Life Achievement Award on June 8, 2017, more than 3 decades had passed since she and Al Pacino had ended their romantic relationship. Both had built extraordinary careers, earned Academy Awards, and become icons of American cinema. Yet when Pacino walked onto the stage to honor her, he did not deliver a formal speech filled with career statistics or industry praise. Instead, he chose to tell deeply personal stories that revealed what Diane had meant to him long after their relationship had ended. Pacino began with gentle humor, complimenting Diane's hat before recalling the first dinner with the Godfather cast in East Harlem. He recreated the moment when Marlon Brando introduced himself to the young actress, only to have Diane respond with complete disbelief. The audience laughed, but the story served a larger purpose. It reminded everyone that long before they became Hollywood legends, they had simply been a group of young actors finding their way together, and Diane had already possessed the fearless personality that would define her throughout her life. He then shifted to a far more intimate memory. Pacino admitted that interviews had always made him uncomfortable, even after becoming one of the most celebrated actors in the world. Before one interview, Diane encouraged him as he prepared to leave. Just as he walked out the door, she called after him with one unforgettable piece of advice. "Al, you're going to be okay. Just remember, whatever you do, don't say you're an artist." The audience laughed again, but Pacino paused before delivering the line that transformed the entire speech. Looking directly at Diane, he answered the advice she had given him years earlier. "Forgive me, you're an artist. You're a great artist." Then he added 5 simple words that immediately became the emotional heart of the evening. I love you forever. For many people watching, those words sounded less like a celebrity tribute and more like the closing chapter of a relationship that had never completely disappeared. Pacino was not trying to revisit the past or suggest that they should have stayed together. Instead, he was publicly acknowledging something much deeper, that love can evolve without ending. Romantic relationships sometimes fail, but gratitude, admiration, and genuine affection can survive long after the romance itself has faded. Diane herself had spoken with remarkable honesty about why their relationship ended. In interviews, she explained that she eventually wanted marriage, while Pacino could never make that commitment. She admitted giving him an ultimatum, hoping he would finally choose a future with her. When he did not, the relationship came to an end. Years later, however, she looked back without bitterness. Speaking to People and later to the Sunday Times, Diane said she eventually realized marriage would probably not have worked for either of them. She believed they were simply too different. As she explained, Pacino needed someone who could take care of him, while she felt she needed someone who would take care of her. Looking back, she concluded that although the breakup had not been her choice, it was ultimately the right outcome. She even described marriage between them as something that might have become a nightmare for both of them. That perspective makes Pacino's 2017 tribute even more meaningful. He never tried to rewrite history or pretend they had made the wrong decision. Instead, he celebrated the qualities that had always made Diane extraordinary: her intelligence, her humor, her honesty, and her ability to change people's lives simply by believing in them. In later interviews promoting his memoir Sonny Boy, Pacino continued speaking warmly about Diane. He openly credited her with helping him through some of the most uncertain periods of his personal and professional life, from encouraging him when he struggled financially to pushing him toward opportunities that revitalized his career. Rather than describing her only as a former partner, he repeatedly emphasized how much he respected her judgment and how grateful he remained for her unwavering support. For many years, the public viewed the relationship between Al Pacino and Diane Keaton through a familiar Hollywood lens. They were two brilliant actors who fell in love while making one of the greatest films ever produced, stayed together on and off for years, and ultimately separated because they wanted different futures. It sounded like another bittersweet celebrity romance destined to become part of movie history. Yet Pacino's later reflections revealed that their story did not end with heartbreak. Instead, it evolved into something far more unusual, an enduring respect that continued to shape both of their lives long after the romance was over. One of the reasons Pacino's memories resonated so deeply is that they never focused on regret or lost opportunities. Whenever he spoke publicly about Diane, he rarely centered the conversation on what they failed to become as a couple. Instead, he consistently emphasized what she gave him as a person. She challenged him when he avoided difficult decisions, stood beside him when his finances collapsed, encouraged him when his confidence faltered, and pushed him toward projects that helped rebuild his career. Those were not dramatic Hollywood legends invented years later. They were stories Pacino himself chose to tell repeatedly, suggesting that they remained among the defining memories of his adult life. That perspective also explains why his appearance at Diane Keaton's 2017 American Film Institute tribute remains so significant. The speech was not prepared as a farewell or an attempt to revisit an old romance. Diane was alive, healthy, and being celebrated for more than 5 decades of extraordinary work in film. Pacino had every opportunity to deliver a conventional tribute by listing her Academy Award for Annie Hall in 1978, her nominations for Reds, 1981, Marvin's Room, 1996, and Something's Gotta Give, 2003, or her influence as an actress and filmmaker. Instead, he deliberately chose stories that only someone who had truly known her could tell. His closing words, "I love you forever," stood out precisely because they sounded completely natural. They were not presented as an attempt to rewrite history or imply that they should have married. Rather, they acknowledged that love can survive in forms that no longer resemble romance. It had become gratitude, admiration, friendship, and an enduring appreciation for someone who had helped shape his life during moments that the public never witnessed. In the years that followed, both actors continued speaking about each other with striking honesty. Diane never denied that she had once hoped Pacino would marry her, but she also admitted that such a marriage probably would not have lasted. Pacino, meanwhile, never suggested that their breakup had been a mistake. His recollections instead highlighted the qualities he admired most: her intelligence, courage, humor, and remarkable ability to tell him the truth, even when it was uncomfortable. That consistency across decades makes his reflections especially credible. They were not emotional statements made in the heat of a breakup or an attempt to generate publicity. They were observations that remained unchanged as both of them grew older. Following Diane Keaton's death, several media outlets published reports claiming that Pacino privately regretted never marrying her and considered her the love of his life. Those stories, however, relied on unnamed sources and have never been publicly confirmed by Pacino himself. While such reports attracted widespread attention, they should be treated as unverified claims rather than established fact. What is firmly documented are Pacino's own public statements over many years. Those statements reveal profound affection, lasting gratitude, and deep respect, but they stop short of making the claims attributed to anonymous insiders. Al Pacino and Diane Keaton never got the Hollywood ending that many fans imagined, but perhaps their story was never meant to end with a wedding. Instead, it became a lasting example of how love can evolve into respect, gratitude, and lifelong admiration. Even decades after they went their separate ways, the memories Pacino chose to share revealed just how deeply Diane had influenced both his life and his career. What do you think? If Al Pacino had accepted Diane Keaton's dream of marriage, do you believe their relationship could have lasted, or was their friendship ultimately the happier ending? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next Hollywood deep dive.